The number one time in our entire lives when we're most likely to be bullied anywhere in the world is middle school. And the number one thing that will stop it is a caring, safe environment where everybody's on the same page together as teachers. We really start mobilizing kids to be upstanders, to say no to a bully.
Hey everyone, my name's Kyle Walgren. This is another episode of The Business of Education. Our next guest is somebody that has served children her entire career. With over 40 years experience, she's written 24 books, including Unselfie and Thrivers. She's spoken to over 1 million principals across 19 countries, 5 continents. She's received numerous awards, National Education Award, National Children's Safety Award, and is recognized globally for her groundbreaking work to prevent bullying. She has frequently been on shows like Dr. Phil, NBC Nightly, and Dateline, just to name a few, and has given a powerful TED Talk embracing titles like Empathy is a Verb. Our next guest, Dr. Michele Borba. Dr. Borba, how are you?
I am fine. I'm hiring you as my new PR person. Thank you, Kyle, for that
you
intro.
Like that? I got what my team put it all out, and I'm like, how do I put 5 pages of accomplishments into one paragraph? So
you don't, just like 2 sentences. I just love kids. That's all you needed to say. Thank you.
So you and I align. I never thought that I was going to be in the role that I'm in today. I'm in an education software company, and I do these podcasts so I can learn from people that have spent their whole life in education, because I'm trying to catch up in a very short amount of time. But you, on the other hand, have spent your whole life doing this. What guided you in this direction? What made you take on this journey so long ago?
I had a first grade teacher named Mrs. Fredrickson. It's amazing how teachers can make an absolute difference in your life. And I remembered her so much. I remembered her standing at the door every day and greeting every one of us when we came in. And then she'd always have her discipline being H&H. Was that helpful or hurtful? So what are you going to do to make it helpful? And the most amazing thing is, Kyle, I'm telling you, about 10 years after I graduated from college, we went to a high school reunion. 9 of those kids showed up, and every one of them remembered Mrs. Fredrickson's H&H and standing at the door. And I said, if one person can make a difference like that, that's what I'm going to be as a teacher. And that's how it all started.
That's amazing. I never wanted to get into education. I actually hated education. I was one of the kids that left school early. As soon as you had the option to leave, I was headed out. But circling back after becoming a father, my priorities changed. And I just wanted to make sure that my kids didn't go through the same things that I went through. So I decided to get into education. I own a software company that will help parents teach their kids how to read if they can't read, because that was my situation.
But bravo. I started teaching special education with children with learning disabilities. And there was a lot of them who, Kyle, there was some of them like you, and then there was others who bounced back, but you bounced back, and look what you did. You went on to do great things. But I found that the single greatest correlation was parenting. If the parent was there or somebody was there, and that's the leading message to anybody who's an educator, whether you are a caring champion to a child, that's the correlation to whether or not a child can bounce back from adversity.
So, and I agree with you. And one of the things that really drove me as a parent, where I was like, I'm not going to let my kids be non-readers, because that's what I considered myself, was a non-reader, was the amount that I was bullied in middle school. I can vividly remember the Mean Girls when I was in grade 7 and 8. And I look back and, it's interesting to see where they went and where I've become, or what I've become, so that's super inspiring looking back. But bullying was my number one reason to teach my kids how to read. And you've spent your life, impacting bullying, preventing bullying, not just locally, but globally. What made you want to head that direction? And, tell us about your journey around the world.
Well, the journey was tragic, because I spoke in Columbine. And I remember coming back as a speaker, because I had spoken at Littleton and saying, this is where we should be raising our sons. And then a few weeks later, I turned on CNN, and voila, there is the worst school shooting, or the beginning of the school shooting.
The beginning of it.
And it hasn't stopped, has it? I just got I've gotten letters and from emails from counselors in Georgia who are trying to help kids after the trauma of the last school shooting we've had. So what I found out, Kyle, is that you weren't alone. The number one time in our entire lives when we're most likely to be bullied anywhere in the world is middle school. And the number one thing that will stop it is a caring, safe environment where everybody's on the same page together as teachers. And we really start mobilizing kids to be upstanders, to say no to a bully. A bully wants power. They're very manipulative on who they choose. But if we can choose other children who become upstanders, and they are phenomenal because they have this commodity called empathy, which can be cultivated. What we then do is teach them skills, and they mobilize other kids. And pretty soon I've seen school after school around the world just change because kids are on board together saying, we're not going to tolerate this.
We're not going to do it. From my experience, I grew up on the other side of the tracks, quote unquote. I was from a single family home, less than wealthy. We'll put it that way. My mom's an amazing lady, but we went through a lot with very little.
Yeah.
And, that was the divide in the town that I grew up. There was the rich
Yes.
people and there was the poor people. And
Yes.
that was the divide. And that was kind of what separated us. It's not like that as much anymore. My kids, come from a very secure and safe financial environment. But they still see bullying. And, my son is one of the top athletes in school, has lots of friends, but, still comes home and he's like, these are some things that they're going through. So it's changed, especially from when I grew up to the way it is now. What are some of the trends that you've seen, how that bullying's changed, and, how kids are dealing with it differently?
Number one, I see that it has escalated over the last couple of years because we are not getting back to really creating a safe zone for children. Number two is the next thing that kids say, because I do focus groups with children, they give me the answers. They say they need a place to be able to report it. And they need a place where it's visual, not that you're going to be able to say, Johnny's doing the bullying, but the report can also say, and Kara was really nice to me, thank you very much. But they put it in a slot. And what they find is the teachers and principals who take that, just that mailbox with there's a lock and a key on it that may be in the middle of the quad, but every day they open it up. What happens is pretty soon they begin to see a trend on who is doing the bullying because they do it when adults are not present.
Right.
The second thing I find that is really an easy thing to do is ask your kid where it's taking place and when, because it's not everywhere. It's always situational. So if you can figure out the where and the when, you can always come up with a plan B of where should you be. And number two is, so who's your safety nets? And if a child doesn't have a safety net, start just going everywhere you can to figure out who's the person in case of a problem at that school you're going to go to and you can trust. It could be a kid and it could be a grown-up, and hopefully it's both. But my concern is kids who don't have safety nets. We're looking at something called the 100% project. And that is we give an index card to every single child at the whole school. And we say, write the one person that you can turn to at this school. And we collect the cards. And then we look at who doesn't have anybody. And that's who we zero in on, because that's a kid who's at a really high risk. The other thing that obviously is jeopardizing it is not just happening on the playground, it's happening online. Right. And it's harder for a school to be able to do that. But there's a wonderful thing that we're looking at Mary Louise Academy started. It's called Delete Day. And that is every kid in a technology class, which you usually have at every school, takes that one day to go together with friends, and everybody starts deleting their accounts that look like it's not a good persona, or you're putting things up that aren't nice. You delete it together, and it's made a major difference on kids' lives. The bulk of this, Kyle, is that it's all because most children don't have empathy. If you feel with another human being and go, how would I feel if that happened to me? It's real hard to be mean. But if we can recultivate empathy, because it's nosedived, it's at a 40% drop in just the last 38 years, where narcissism, I'm better than you, has gone up 58% in American kids, faster than any other country in the world. We're tracking thousands and thousands of kids. So what does that mean as parents or educators sitting listening here? The answer is creating kids who think we, not me. And how you do that is to cultivate that glorious commodity. You're born with it, called goodness, but you start recultivating it so kids start thinking about the other person. How would I feel if that happened to me? What does that person need? And then we start giving kids skills on how to be safely assertive, how to step in or who to go to, and you'll change the whole culture, Kyle.
I love that. The other part, because I've got young kids, they start at 11, go down to 2.
Yeah.
So 11, 10, 6 and 2. So I'm just going through it all, right? And it's shooting all kinds of like memories from my childhood watching these kids grow up, but it's amplified. But the difference is I've got proud mama bear that wants to rip the lips off everybody that hurts, the babies. So what's some advice for parents that have kids that are going through this, and these kids are coming home brokenhearted, and how can they help?
Well, the number one thing, Kyle, congratulate yourself and your wife because you're listening to your kids. The first thing that we need to know is that kids are telling us why they don't come to us. And the first thing is because we don't believe them. How could that be happening to you? So listen carefully to your child, be the safety net for your child, and let them know no matter what happens, I'm here for you, so they start to come. The second thing is start asking the pattern. Where did it happen? Not why, that's too much, but where did it happen? And when did it happen? And you'll begin to give a safety net of, okay, then go to this part of the cafeteria or go to that part of the cafeteria. Does your child have at least one safety net of one kid he can go to? And I'm not talking a child who's going to report with them, but a child who at least he can sit down next to. Who do you play with? Who do you eat lunch with? Be concerned if your kid says nobody. So that means we need to rebuild the social skills. The first thing is active listening and just being quiet. That's a hard thing. Is boy, do you want to just rush in there, but listen carefully and find out if he's got a safety net. Then go onto your school's website. Do they have what to do in case my child is bullied? It should be, because it's a state law for most states that they have that, and there's a way to go and what to do. Bullying is learned and can be unlearned, but I still think the answer is back to we start building up our children's that wonderful commodity called empathy, which is feeling with another person, which can be cultivated at age 2. So there you go, Dad. You got some moments to go with here.
I got some moments to go, and empathy is something that I had to retrain myself. I became numb to a lot of things growing up, especially with the little bit of traumas that I experienced. Empathy was something that I've had to definitely work on as an adult. So I'm sure my kids are struggling with that or missing it themselves because they don't see it as much as they should from me. But that being said, what about advice for the parent on the other side of the table, and they know that their kid's the one doing the bullying? How do they step in?
Well, first of all, congratulate yourself that you're listening, you're hearing, and you're believing that your child could be acting in that particular way. Bullying is learned and can be unlearned. The second thing you've got to do is find out, not just talking to your child, but you've got to get at a conference immediately with other adults. Where is it happening? When is it happening? And then you'll figure out the why it's happening. If you know that your child is demonstrating really aggressive behavior, what most schools and the parents do is set up a line of, you can't go this way, and here's the way you can only step here, but you can't go any further for this particular child. There's a real just like a safety net around so that the child feels safe. And you go over and over again. Kyle, there's 3 things that we know that produce moral behavior. That character. It's fascinating because we've actually looked at people who are what we call altruists, the really good of the world. How did they get that way? How did they become the rescuer? How did they do everything they did? And some phenomenal researchers, Samuel Alliner was one of them, started asking them. And he found out that 2 things happened. It had nothing to do with DNA, but it had to do with how they were raised. And we can all use that as a lesson. The first thing is they all had expectations, they said, in their home. Mm-hmm. In our home, kindness was huge. We were supposed to be kind because Dad kept saying, in this house, I want you to be kind. Or Mom kept saying, in this house, I want you to be kind. I don't care what your character trait is, but stand for something. What do you want embedded in your child when they leave? And maybe that's the moment right now during the end of this podcast that you sit and go, how do I want my kid to turn out? because we don't ask that question nearly enough. So the first thing is expectations. The second thing is example. It was fascinating. The kids kept saying, I kept seeing in my dad, or I kept seeing in my mom, or I kept seeing her when she watched a sad movie. She'd go, this is so sad because there are all those people in Florida right now. They need some help. What can we do? So it was the example that they saw on a day-to-day basis, not just you and your wife, but it could be grandma or grandpa or the neighbors next door. They started pointing out adults or children who were examples of the behavior traits of character that they wanted. The third thing I love is experiences. We didn't just hear about it. We didn't just see it, but we had opportunities to do it. And that seems to be critical. You can put a box by your back door. It's called a charity box. And every time you have a gently used toy that you're done, or you've got a book that you're done with, or I don't care, it's a backpack, you put it in the box. And when it's all filled, we as a family, not just you as a parent, but we as a family, take it and give it to somebody who needs it.
Oh,
Every child that I have interviewed said it was the experience of one-to-one, of giving it to the person that changed my life. All the kids got teary-eyed just telling me, you can't believe it. I saw myself as a different way, because that person started to cry a little bit and said, thank you. And I never saw myself as a kind person. It's not soft and fluffy. It's transformational. So don't just get collecting 50,000 coins and send them to Biafra. The research says your kid has to see the moment, and that will be the moment that changes their life.
That really resonated with me. My experience is kind of a little bit different. You know, my mom did a really good job at making us think that we weren't poor. You know, she tried her hardest to give us everything it could. It dawned on me the day that it was just before Christmas, grade 3, the school knocked on the door. I'm like, I went to school today. I shouldn't be in trouble. But they were dropping off a food hamper. And the it has resonated with me every day of my life since then. Was like, I'm never going to put my kids or my family through this ever again. And that's what was instilled to me. I need to be a hard worker. My mom was a hard worker. It was just, you know, misfortune early on that put us in this position. So when I think of the character traits that I want to pass on to my kids, and I'm guilty of not putting empathy first, all I care about is my kids being a hard worker. And when they show up, they put out their best efforts. You recently wrote a book called Thrivers. You discuss why some kids struggle while other kids thrive. This is big in our house. I like all my kids being overachievers, especially in sports. So walk us through that. Why do some kids thrive and why some kids struggle?
Well, you thrived, didn't you? And a lot of it is because of your mom. The more you talk about her, I'm going, God, bravo. It's not that you lived in poverty. It's that you had experiences that showed you a different part of who you were and what you are. And I think that's the first thing. I wrote Thrivers because I came across a piece of research that you'd love. It was by Emmy Werner. Oh, this woman is a godsend. From University of California. And what she tried to figure out is why some kids do thrive despite enormous obstacles and adversity in their life. And what she did was study a cohort of almost 700 children for 40 years, Kyle. And every one of those kids had been homeless, impoverished, their parents were incarcerated, they grew up in, maybe a war-torn area. And she kept studying them. Now, here's the piece that's wonderful, for 30 years until they grew up. She's studying them with pediatricians and researchers and other psychologists, and they all were blown away because even by teens, 1/3 of them were caring, confident, and competent despite the adversity. Now she looks at it and she says the why, and she finds out that besides the fact, number one, is they had a caring adult. And if it's not the parent, it could be my Mrs. Fredrickson or somebody else who was there and refused to give up on the child. But the second thing she found was that many of them had what was called a protective place. It could be the Boys and Girls Club. It could be the local down the street place or a neighborhood, but it was some place that the child could go to and feel safe, or the school. The third thing that I think that we ought to add to our parenting is that the children had also learned skills. Not, I'm going to be good and that's what's going to help me get the test score and the GPA, but skills to help them find challenges and become more resilient. On the tops of the list, and the book Thrivers I have, in fact, there it is. It's Each chapter is one of those skills that matters most. The first one is confidence, that the child had knowledge of their strengths and they used them. Most kids that we now know face the adversity and bounce back, Kyle, have a healthy hobby. Not cell phones, but a healthy hobby that they go to. It could be woodwork, it could be knitting, it could be reading, it could be music. It's not what mom and dad want, it's what the kid wants. So figure out what your child's strengths are and start being talent scouts. That's number one.
I want to ask a question right there. So our kid, one of our kids, amazing athlete,
Yes.
but loves playing video games. But he plays video games. We feel like his attitude changes. How do you support a hobby that the impact of that hobby appears to be negative in how you interact and engage with the people around you?
Kyle, you are 5 steps ahead of most parents, because the first question I would ask is, watch the child when they're engaged in a hobby. Is it healthy, and does it enhance the child's well-being? Or do you see at the end of it that stress is starting to build? And if stress is starting to build, it's not a healthy hobby. Now, how do you do it? You slowly start introducing something else. And it could be a family hobby. What you start doing, you already know he's great in sports. But what can he do on a day-to-day basis inside the house that just kind of soothes him? And that's what we're finding. By the way, university professors and presidents are seeing that change in our kids. They're coming, and the number one time they're most likely to drop out of school their entire life is end of freshman year, first semester of college. Why? Most of them don't know how to handle the first B plus, or they don't know how to handle the breakup with, with the roommate. So introduce healthy hobbies, Kyle, and figure out what your child loves to do. And it could be a family hobby, and you're not going to find the answer tomorrow. It's figuring out what are they. Maybe it's just nature walks. Maybe it's music. What is it that your child can go to that brings the dimmer switch down on stress, that he can go to as that's my go-to for stress reduction?
That's really interesting. The reason why we don't hammer down on sports is I don't want him to experience burnout. But he did bring up recently, and not recently, that he wanted a violin for Christmas. And we're like, okay, this seems random, so we got him the violin, but we didn't follow up and make sure that he went into lessons. So I'm going to bring that back up to mom and be like, hey, I think that, this might be a great replacement for those video games. And I believe technology is going to be a part of our kids' lives. So I don't want to
definitely
ban them from it or, keep it out of their lives. But, and kids, you see people now winning millions of dollars playing video games. So you can't tell them a story that it's not a living either. But
here's another thing though, Kyle. There are fabulous lessons that he could also do and substitute the video games to a YouTube tape lesson about violins. It's amazing on the music that you can do of doing together with your kid. Hey, let's look up on and find out where you can go to learn how to play this violin. You can also take him to lessons, but in addition, he could be doing them at home, and that could be one thing. That's the first thing, is that healthy hobby that we overlook, and figuring out who your kid is, not what we want them to be. And you've got a number of children in that house. Each one of them is going to be different as night and day. So it's
they're all
being
different.
The talent scout for each one. The second one we already talked about is empathy. Social confidence, Kyle, is highly correlated. So keep building that. But the third one is extremely important, says the Surgeon General right now. That's self-control. Does your child know how to manage the stress? Because if they don't, there goes executive function, there goes focusing, there goes behavior. And we're seeing that nosediving in American kids right now. Every school I go to, I ask, what's the biggest change? Self-control. Because we're not working on teaching it to the kids.
It doesn't seem like a whole lot's trending up lately, does it? It seems like everything's nosediving, from literacy rates to empathy to self-control. Confidence, it's all just going down the tank. Most recently, I gave my first TED Talk. Mine was on literacy rates. Yours, empathy is a verb. Walk us through that.
Well, I will tell you that once again, it was children who gave me the answer to a question, because I know that emotional literacy is the gateway to empathy, just being able to read feelings, but how do you teach it? So I happened to be in way far north in Fort McMurray in Canada, And the
We can
superintendent
circle
said,
back to that. I grew up in Alberta, Canada. So
oh, I spent so much of my time in my beginning of my speaking engagements were in Alberta. I loved Alberta. Oh, that's so funny. Well, I was way up north there in loving Alberta, and the superintendent said, get into the third grade class. They're teaching emotional literacy in a very unique way. I walked in, and all the kids were sitting around a great big green rug waiting for the teacher. I kept figuring out, why isn't the teacher here? And they said, oh, she's waiting. She's waiting. Come on over. They all had me sit down. And then the teacher opened the door, walked in, and I was blown away because for the next 30 minutes, I sat there with my mouth open. The teacher was an 8-month-old baby named Clara.
oh,
She
wow.
sat in the middle of the rug, and how this came to be, it's called Roots of Empathy. Clara comes in once a month, and the kids learn empathy from Clara. The first question from the real adult teacher was, how does Clara seem to feel today? And all the kids would look at her and go, oh, she looks worried. She looks anxious. She looks upset. Each kid had a wonderful word. By the way, the higher the emotional literacy of kids, the better they are in the classroom. We do know that engagement absolutely boosts deeper thinking and academic achievement. So it's not just fluffy. But I kept looking at it as the kids were just wonderful on Clara. And I turned to the little guy next to me who told me Clara was learning empathy. I said, I don't think it's just Clara, but why does this work? And this third grader said the most brilliant thing. He said, it works because empathy is a verb. I said,
Oh, wow.
What does that mean? And he said, you don't learn it on a worksheet. You don't learn it like a word of the month. You got to learn it from seeing it and feeling it from real people. And we're learning it from Clara. That's the takeaway to every parent. We got to put our own phones down and we've got to sit down and have face-to-face connection with kids, or always look at the color of the talker's eyes, or just take a moment and just start rebuilding connection back, because our kids, Kyle, are looking down, not up. And the longer they look down at a screen as opposed to a human being, the lower their empathy scores go.
It's crazy the amount of stuff that our kids can teach us if they learn. And actually, the company that
and
I
we
run,
listen.
and we listen. The company that I run and build today at Soma, the reading platform, was sparked by my daughter. She wanted me to teach her how to read, and because of the separation during COVID, we looked up an app, and she saw at 6 years old that I was struggling with reading. My 6-year-old saw that I was struggling, and she said, Dad, wouldn't it be great if the app told you what you were getting wrong? And I just looked at her and I'm like, you're the smartest human I've ever met. And I ended up selling the business I had then and building the software company that I own today. So it's been an amazing journey, and our kids can teach us so much as long as we listen. Like you said, as long as we listen.
Kyle, can I go one step more on how brilliant your 6-year-old is? One of the best ways to also, you tell her she's right on the mark. One of the best ways to instill empathy is literary fiction. So it's reading books like Wonder or The Wednesday Surprise or Harry Potter, books where kids can get into the shoes of a character, especially one who's different from them. We've learned that it's a wonderful way to actually, this is York University and back up in Canada, they did it. They did the studies that found that the longer the kids read or have it read to them, literary fiction, the more their empathy scores go up.
Oh, wow. I'm going to dive into this a lot more. I promised you that we'd keep your time to around 30 minutes. So I always end with the same question. You've traveled the world. You've been 19 different countries. You've spoke at 3 different continents. That's amazing. But so we have a lot of young entrepreneurs that watch our podcast. How well has your network helped you with your career? And if you were to give some advice to, our younger generation to use their network, what would it be?
Oh, well, the number one thing is my whole career was not planned. It just took off because people would call me. My first suggestion is say yes to what you're passionate about. If it sounds like a good idea, say yes to it. And that's the first thing of how my career took off. Why was I on the Today Show 70 times? It just was a fluke of, I did a TED talk or I did a speech, somebody would hear it, another person would hear it. Find what you love to do. Don't let anybody deviate from it, because the research says you'll be the happiest you could possibly be when you're in the flow state doing what you love. And I congratulate you because you found what you loved, Kyle. A 6-year-old daughter helped you get that way. And I think sometimes we need to listen to the kids a lot more, because every career move on my part was listening to a kid and go, they're right on the mark again.
And I can't express this enough. I would have never told anybody I would have been down this path ever in my life. And now this company's young. It's 4 years old, but it's affecting lives, and kids are using it, across the United States now. So it's a really inspiring, amazing feeling to be able to know that you're making an impact. So do find that thing you love. I can't recommend it enough, because it has changed my life. It gives me more to wake up for than just my family and, the love of my life, but also the impact that I can leave. Michele, if somebody wanted to reach out, they wanted to get a hold of you, they wanted to find out more about you, where should we send them?
Oh, thank you. Well, it's real easy. My first name's Michele, but I'm a 1L Michele. And my last name's Borba, and I rhyme with Zorba. So it's michelleborba.com, and there you go. And you'll find, I think the most important thing is, if you like Thrivers, go for that one, because that's how to teach resilience. If you're worried about empathy, oh gosh, I hope you are. It's unselfie. And each chapter is just dozens of things you can do. And Kyle, each chapter is loaded with books you should read out loud to your kid about that particular concept. You're right on the mark.
I love that. And we're going to leave links below in this for everybody who wants access to the books, the websites. We'll also leave her LinkedIn. That's how we found you. I love LinkedIn. It's an amazing tool.
I do too.
But Michele, thank you so much for your time. I've learned so much, and I'm going to reach out again, because I know we're just scraping the surface. So thank you.
I hope you do, Kyle. Thank you very much, and go thank all your kids. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.